At this time, I will ask the operator to take calls. If you have a question, you can either press *1 or you can type it into the chat pod.
Yes, I did actually type a question in, but this is a different question. How they were able in each of these very major cities and highly urbanized areas to retrofit such wide rights-of-way for all of these various uses, to get the wider transit ways in, the separation of the bike infrastructure, and still provide for auto transportation, and whether there were just a lot of huge redevelopments involved or if they already had the rights-of-way.
I can try and jump in. This is Clinton Bench, and others correct me if I'm going off course. It was actually interesting, I think in the case of Ahmedabad, where the John Mark BRT system was built, they specifically chose, and this is part of that incremental implementation standard that we were talking about before, they specifically chose, as I said, a major state highway that had a large amount of existing government-owned right-of-way. And what was interesting there was that the use of the right-of-way had been encroached on substantially by neighboring businesses. And so a lot of sales space for businesses as well as parking was encroaching upon that right-of-way. So the municipal government had to come in and basically take that back. Legally it was practical to do, but through a pretty substantial public participation process by which the business owners as well as other community members were involved, it was very clearly presented what the benefits would be, both to those businesses and to other people who are using the corridor, for longer distance mobility. And especially given the fact that the orderliness of traffic flow was going to be much better, and that they would be bringing substantially more people to the corridor, the business owners were relatively cooperative, and indeed in most cases needed no kind of forcing off of the right-of-way to be able to build the system. In Guangzhou, though, on the other hand, where the other major BRT system was that we looked at, that particular corridor was substantially changed in terms of the business development nearby before BRT was implemented. So the right-of-way was already there and it just needed to be reorganized. However, what is happening in Guangzhou and Shanghai and many other Chinese cities is that determinations are being made by the municipal government about what the land use is going to be, especially in central business districts. And basically by eminent domain, residences and businesses are, for lack of a better term, simply eliminated, and those businesses and residents are relocated to what to us to be better housing facilities and better business locations. But certainly that gets into a social justice discussion that's probably not appropriate for here.
Clinton, could I add that in Guangzhou, we found that the public participation process was more similar to ours than was originally expected. They did extensive public outreach, soliciting opinions. They had to report back to committees, and they did get a lot of strong pushback from people on it. They had to do a lot of media outreach when they first started, but really it was once they launched the BRT and they realized it was actually better for all modes of traffic that they were able to gain acceptance for it. And they also went through an environmental impacts assessment. So at a local level, the local planning was a lot more similar to what we experienced in the U.S. than what we had thought going into it.
And we're noting, just finishing Heather's thought, the planning changed as a result of the participation from the public and the public input. So I think many of us found it sort of both surprising and refreshing with, I suppose, our stereotype of China as an authoritarian government structure. At the local level, there was this participation, and the local government listened, and they actually changed the final product from what it was initially.
Hi, my question is toward the BRT in Ahmedabad. Heather, you mentioned that the BRT stations are accessible to everybody in the city. Does that include that the BRT stations are ADA compliant? Do they meet the ADA compliance now? And the other question is, in grandeur, with the frequency of those buses, like every 10 seconds, how did you observe the congestion and grandeur? How do they deal with that too?
Well, to answer your first question, the stations that we, at least the ones that we saw, were accessible via a ramp. And you could board. It was a flat, basically the bus entries were raised, but because the station platforms were also raised, it was a flat and even surface. So technically, someone in a wheelchair could access their BRT system. I don't know if it would meet our current ADA standards, but accessibility was part of that design. As for your other question, we visited during a Sunday. It was very busy. I think they deal with the congestion in a couple ways. Again, they mentioned the really long platforms. They have the longest BRT station platforms in the world. It's basically that operators have to be highly skilled to be able to pull into the stations. They have actually glass doors that open that are lined with the doors so people quickly enter and board. It's the use of technology that it's even connected to the central traffic management system in order to really ensure there's no blockages, and they also have the 2 lanes. I think that, what we saw, it was still growing, so how they're dealing with congestion farther down the road, I don't know, but I think it was just by use of every possible technological solution and really designing it as a high-capacity BRT corridor.
I asked my question on the text screen as well, but I'm wondering what the applicability is. How do we extract lessons for the U.S.? There's obviously great differences in the market and the context. So I'm wondering if there's an intended follow-up, if there's an intention for public policy information as a result of this. Can you help us understand that?
Well, so I'll toss in a couple of thoughts, and maybe Kevin has some other ideas too on sort of the general nature, but I would repeat some of the lessons that we learned about the entrepreneurial nature of the involvement of what are typically more public enterprises, especially the CEP University in Ahmedabad, which had federal support for effectively becoming a consultant for the design and development of bus rapid transit systems throughout India. Similarly, the Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, which is a private enterprise but partially owned by, and I forget whether or not it was the regional government or the federal government that has a partial share, but the sort of innovative approach there was to set up that entity to have full responsibility for the ongoing state of good repair of the capital assets and for operation of the system at a break-even point, but strategically identifying initial capital investments in terms of providing land to the corporation for development of the rapid transit system, assurances that the connecting bus services would not necessarily compete with the Delhi Metro Rail, and indeed Delhi Metro Rail has the ability to do feeder buses on their own. But then Delhi Metro Rail has full breadth of responsibility for an opportunity to develop the air rights and other lands associated with the rapid transit. In Guangzhou, we saw some of the same types of entrepreneurial approaches from public academic institutions. In that case, the institution is called the Guangzhou Municipal Engineering Design and Research Institute, which was very much involved in the design and development of the BRT network, and is similar to CEP University in India, taking responsibility then for the development of other BRT systems throughout the country. Going back to Delhi Metro Rail Corporation too, I would just note that the DMRC is actually the responsible entity for development of, I think, 6 or 7 new metro rail systems in India now as well. So that was just a couple of interesting innovations that I think do have some real applicability here in the United States, but I'll throw it open to the others to see if they had some other thoughts.
Well, I think that, in a sense, the core of the question is how does the learning that our mission absorbs, how do we transfer that information to our colleagues throughout the United States? And I think this webinar is an example of that. The digest that's issued by TRB summarizing the study, the trip, is another way that that is done. And otherwise, with the contact information from the members of the trip, I'd encourage anyone who's on the webinar today to whether it's contacting Gwen at National Academies or any one of us, to follow up if you have questions specific to different elements of the effort. I don't know if Gwen is still on the phone and if she wants to speak to how, from the FTA and the National Academies standpoint, the dissemination of the information. There certainly was a lot of learning. For me, the BRT advancement, particularly in Guangzhou, but not just Guangzhou, helps us, I think, better understand and debate within the United States the place for BRT versus rail investments, whether it's light rail investments or streetcars and so forth, versus rubber tire approaches to high-capacity transit. That is one place that the United States is kind of behind much of the world that's begun to evolve very major BRT projects. So I think that has been very useful, certainly for me. I've got 6 BRT lines in the planning or implementation stage here in Seattle. So seeing what happens internationally and the types of things that other cities are able to do is very important for us as we develop that mode choice within the United States.
Let's take one of the web questions. So what is the public input process in these cities regarding transportation facilities? Who makes the final decisions?
Well, it certainly differs in India and China. I think Kevin is absolutely correct, and Heather as well, in noting that China seems to be making substantial strides towards recognizing the value and incorporating the value of public input into their processes. India certainly does as well, and I think, to be perfectly honest, I was impressed with, I shouldn't say impressed, but just noted that India's system for public involvement is frankly almost exactly like ours in terms of the length of time that's allowed for, in terms of public involvement in the environmental review process, the types of constituencies that are addressed. I think that the implementation, the time of implementation, and the opportunities for legal challenges and such to hold up construction are certainly not as acute of an issue in India. But on the other hand, when it comes to just the official processes for public involvement, it's really just very much like ours. In the case of China, I think it's certainly developing, and it's I think what we found was interesting, that there isn't as much, I think, progress towards the full integration of public participation across each of the different phases of the project development process, and that's partly because I think they're struggling a lot with kind of the balkanization of responsibilities when it comes to sort of initial policy concept, and then the design and engineering, and then the ongoing operations and such. And I think that's maybe sort of more of a legacy challenge in China, that policy decisions are made sort of by elected officials. They come up with the grain of the idea in the first place, hand it off to one of these engineering institutes to develop the program. They hand it back off to the municipality for implementation, and then back to whoever the agency is for ongoing operation. And I think what they're realizing is that there needs to be more of a common thread of public participation throughout each of those different pieces. And they learned it. I think surprisingly, what we heard in Guangzhou was they were learning these lessons through the media, because the increasingly free media in Guangzhou, I think, is where most of the frustrations ended up, any frustrations that there were about the construction process and the congestion it was causing. were coming out in the newspaper, coming out on television, and they were telling us, the municipal officials were telling us, gosh, we've learned a lot of lessons about the kinds of things we need to make sure that we're clarifying before construction begins about the eventual benefits. We need to clarify those before the media starts getting hold of it. So interesting to hear about very similar challenges that we face here in the United States.
Okay, another question from the chat was, were walking distances for pedestrians to stations relatively similar from city to city?
Hi. Yeah, I would say that the walking distance for the metro, for instance, in Guangzhou, would be longer than what we are experiencing in some of like cities like New York or Chicago, where they're a little bit more convenient, and even the buses as well. I think from what I saw, one of the innovations in China is they really focused on robust corridors for bus service, which meant in some cases that they weren't as close as they might have been in the United States. Like we have a standard of an eighth of a mile bus stop standard, and there might be a little bit longer, but you would have better service, and that's where maybe the bike share comes in providing better access to the system.
Yeah, there is also, this is Mariate, the infrastructure to finalize the trip is very well designed. So Guangzhou, for instance, has 1,000 kilometers of bike lanes. So you can go further using bikes, or you can go further walking, because you have infrastructure all around to be able to access the basic system, the BRT or the metro.
Okay, we have one other question. Given very low ridership in the U.S. when compared to India and China, do you think U.S. will ever be able to attract transit ridership, given the love with autos of U.S. commuters?
It's a great question. This is Heather. I think what we learned is that kind of redesigning, kind of reframing the product of public transit made a big difference. I know that in some cases the BRT systems are enhanced bus service, like in New York, I think it's First and Second Avenue, had some improvements that really helped attract ridership. So I think providing basically a better quality experience, whether it's use of technology, bus-only lane, those type of features help to increase the market share. I don't know if we can ever achieve the share that China and India have, but I think it's by creating a better product and making sure that it's reliable and using the latest technology features.
And I would also throw in, too, both Heather and Mariate mentioned the direct service model that is being used in Guangzhou, Hangzhou, and many other BRT systems around the world. And that is effectively where a large collection of otherwise local bus routes all feed into the same trunk line in the urban core. Now in Guangzhou, I mean, it's pretty darn amazing looking at these stations that have 9 berthing locations and sometimes 9 buses all pulled up to these little docking facilities. But the same kind of concept, and we don't need to have 10-second frequencies, but even in middle-sized cities, or I'm thinking of university campuses that may have some sort of a densely developed spine. I think some of the same lessons can be learned in terms of organizing our local public transportation systems to not necessarily feed into one sort of single transfer center where all transfers are made, but rather to feed into that kind of a core trunk area in the urban core or at a university campus where we can set up these kinds of stations with prepaid fare areas, and direct transfers can be made from one bus to another without having to pay another fare, and with having the effective kinds of BRT elements, ITS elements like next bus information technology and such. So we don't need 10-second frequency, but getting to a point of 5-minute frequency in a middle-sized city in our urban core could have some major benefits, both in terms of the convenience for transit customers and also for economic development along the same corridor.
Yeah, I think that there is also the fact that, this is Mariate, that they, for instance, in Shanghai, they charge the true cost to the driver. We have a very subsidized highway system, and we never see that cost. So being aware of the cost of driving, I think, is something that could improve ridership and funding for these wonderful systems.
Okay, there's one last question. Is there any component of TDM involved here?
Well, this is Clinton. I'm trying to think of some particular examples of transportation demand management. I mean, I think it's interesting if you, this may not be an expected kind of form of TDM, but I think it was mentioned in one of the slides about the approach of the bike share systems in both Hangzhou and Guangzhou in terms of making sure that there's adequate availability of the actual bicycles. And that is they have an interesting sliding scale system for renting the bikes where it slides upwards the longer you have the bike. So renting a bike for the first half hour or something, I can't remember the exact time, is free, and then the next half hour, the next hour is the equivalent of $1, the next half hour or hour is the equivalent of $2. It's explained more in detail in the final report, but it's an interesting approach to making sure that plenty of bicycles would be available for use at each of the racks. So in a sense, it was transportation demand management of the connecting mode. I don't know if others had any other thoughts of the collaboration perhaps with local businesses in terms of, encouraging use of public transportation through subsidized passes and that sort of thing. I don't think there has been quite as much progress on that front, if that's what the TDM question is referring to.
There's another web question here. Does the report include information about the lessons these cities learned in their implementation processes? You mentioned more pre-publicity would have been valuable. What should be incorporated into that they didn't do?
This is Heather. I know that Guangzhou did use the local media, which was critical at first, but they really did use the media to try to show the benefits of BRT as an outreach. Omnibot actually made their BRT system free in the beginning, which really helped attract, obviously it got a huge turnout because it kind of encouraged people to try it out. So I don't know, Clinton, if you have any other thoughts on this.
Well, I would say that the report, it was actually an interesting kind of issue of debate sometimes in our team meetings, and Kevin was mentioning before what a valuable experience the ITSP program is. And part of it is that it's work, but we're sharing a lot of great ideas with other similar thinkers in our industry while we're away, and we're taking some of the lessons we see each day and kind of thinking about how they apply to our own systems. And part of what we had to be sensitive to was these systems are playing host to us. We were effectively ambassadors, of not only our profession in the United States, but also the United States, as a nation. And so, it was our policy to make sure that when we were writing the report, that we were careful not to kind of question perhaps some of the decisions that we thought, might have been poorer ones, but rather identifying some of the good lessons that we could learn from the systems and bring back to apply in the United States. On the other hand, I'm sure that as time goes on, I love the opportunity to be able to talk with individuals about, some of the great stuff we saw, some of the strange stuff we saw, and some of the disconcerting stuff we saw. But yeah, in terms of the official documentation and such, we tried to stay very positive, and indeed 95% of what we saw was very positive.
Okay, I would like to thank everyone for participating in this webinar. Thank you to Gwen, Kevin, Clinton, Heather, and Mariate for a very informative presentation. Thank you very much.